Hey everybody, it's Amanda from Bleak Pod True Crime Channel. Just coming at you with a new episode about the Brian Kohberger case of the Idaho 4. The victims in that case are Kaylee Gonzalez, Xana Kernodle, Madison Mogan, and Ethan Chapin. And there was a Dateline episode that came out not long ago, and there's been a really strong reaction just from the public and from other content creators and the judge. So I want to talk about why I think the reaction that we're seeing is being blown way out of proportion. And I'm going to explain why I think that, and talk a little bit about what did the episode cover, and try to look at it from a more like common sense perspective where we use our critical thinking skills and we don't just fly off the handle. So with that being said, so on May 9th of this year, so just not too long ago, 2025, there was a new Dateline episode about the Idaho 4 murder case. Now, Dateline has done, this is I think the third episode they've done on the case. And it's not uncommon. Dateline will cover high profile or well-known cases that the public is interested in, and they oftentimes will release multiple episodes as a case is approaching trial, or if there are just new developments in general. So, for example, I bring up the Lori Vallow case and Chad Daybell case. I guess she is technically Lori Daybell, but whatever you want to call her. Their case was out of Idaho, and Dateline, I mean, they followed them around with a camera. While they were in Hawaii looking for the kids, and they pretty much, I didn't hear one thing really new at trial in that case that hadn't already come out. So, it's not like this Dateline doing this is super unusual. Now, right at the beginning of this new episode, Dateline talks about having an inside source, if you will, and that they were going to be releasing information that was not known to the public, and basically saying that you're going to learn some things that you didn't know before, even if you've been following this case really closely. Now, people who follow the Kohberger case closely, or any true crime case, a lot of us actually monitor the court docket. And if you go to the Ada County court website, you can read all of the filings that, so if there's like a pretrial conference, all the documents related to that, all the filings will be released, and then the public can view them. And oftentimes we will get new information from those filings, and the judge can decide which filings he wants public and which filings he wants to be sealed. Now, one thing I will say is the new Judge Hippler, so initially this case was going to be tried out of Latah County, which is Moscow, but because it's a smaller city and they wanted a bigger jury pool, they moved the trial from Latah County to Ada County, which is Boise, which is like the most populated area in Idaho. That was the same thing that they did with Lori Daybell. She was also tried in Ada County, same with Chad Daybell. So Judge John Judge, that's really his name, Judge, was initially the judge assigned in Moscow in Latah County, and there was a gag order, and he very much sealed a lot of not exhibits, but like a lot of the evidence that came out in filings and stuff. He was very hush-hush. And when they assigned the case to Judge Hippler, right off the bat, Hippler was like, there's a lot of stuff that's been kept under wraps, and he's like, I'm not going to continue that. He's basically said he's going to allow most everything to be public, and that there was a lot of secrecy, and he was trying to keep, a balance. And so he made it clear right out of the gate that the secrecy that happened with Judge was not going to be the case for, going forward with him as the new judge, which I agree with that, because I think when there's a lot of secrecy, for example, the Delphi case, I wholeheartedly believe they have the correct person. I followed a lot of people who were not, pro-defense or pro-prosecution that went to that trial, and they recapped the trial every day, and they all said kind of the same, like they all came and said the same thing, so I knew that I was getting the correct information because the recaps were the same, and I was thoroughly convinced it was the correct person. But the problem was that case was kept so secretive that there are so many people that still think Richard Allen is innocent, even though in my mind he is not. And if you really took your time and did your research, you would probably realize that, but that's neither here nor there. My whole point is just that a lot of secrecy can actually, if the public's not seeing, the evidence and the way a trial plays out, that can be worse in terms of like the conspiracy theories and things like that. So the Dateline episode comes out, and right in the beginning of the episode, they talk about having a source and how that we're going to find out all these new things. So I watched the episode. I want to say it was it was 2 hours, but then there would have been commercials. So maybe like an hour and a half. And there were a couple things I found out that I didn't know before, as someone who, reads the court docket and follows the case, but not to the point where I was like, it was interesting, but it wasn't like, oh my gosh, I found out so much more, and there were like just a couple little things. So right after it's released, there's a pre-trial conference. It's like the final one, because the trial jury selection is supposed to start July 30th of this year, followed by a trial start date of August 11th. There's a final pre-trial conference. Judge Hippler doesn't really talk about, so there was a public stream of that conference. He doesn't really talk about the Dateline episode too much, but then there's a filing after the conference, and I believe he might have talked about it privately. He had the public stream turned off, and then they talked about it with, the lawyers and stuff. But he basically came out with this filing where he was saying that he is going to get to the bottom of who provided Dateline with all the information, and he was willing to hire a special prosecutor. And he was telling all the attorneys and anybody involved in the case up until now that they are not allowed to delete emails or text messages, and that he's going to be doing this full investigation into where the leak came from. And I can appreciate that from the sense of like, this person blatantly broke his orders. So I get wanting to know who did it from that perspective. But then he goes on this kind of angry tangent about how it's, now they're going to have even worse time picking a jury, and this is costing taxpayers more money because of it. And now, of course, the defense is like, oh, we need a continuance, which means they want more time and they want to delay the trial even more. And then they're asking to get evidence thrown out that was in the, in the program of Dateline. And there was just this huge reaction to it, okay? And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, okay, let's really think about this from like a common sense perspective. Like, not propaganda, not, whoa, like, what's the worst case scenario? Like, let's look at what is the real cause, the real effect of something like this. What did the episode actually put out there that was so new to the case, that was so, like, what are we really saying here? And I think if you take a step back and you go through what was in that episode, it's really not it doesn't have the effect that they're making it seem like it has. So, I want to talk about now what was actually in the episode. So, the episode starts out with talking about the surveillance video. And I will say that, yes, the surveillance video showed more of the time when who we believe to be Bryan Kohberger, the white Elantra, is circling the King Road house prior to the homicides. And that had not been shown before in its entirety. However, you can find a lot of the surveillance video of the white car out. There's a content creator named Gray Hughes who's great with, he splices together a lot of the video footage, and he has really very thorough video footage of the surveillance videos that are out there. So it's a little more of a complete version of the surveillance, but it isn't anything new in the sense of like we've had access to. The only thing it really showed was him circling, and you kind of get the idea that he's maybe like working himself up to get the courage to go commit the crime. But it's really not new, is my point. So after that, a lot of the episode was talking to people who had interactions with Bryan Kohberger leading up to the homicides. And a lot of it, were people who basically said, well, so apparently he went to this pool party on, I want to say it was July 9th of 2022, and at the pool party, he, these girls are saying that he basically made them uncomfortable. And one of the girls was married, and he was wearing a bikini, and he kind of stared at her a little too long. And another girl said she exchanged numbers with Bryan Kohberger, and then he sent her this awkward text message that was overly formal in the way it was worded. And it seemed very much like, okay, yeah, he's a socially awkward guy that does not fit into your social settings. And here's the thing. I have empathy for Bryan Kohberger prior to him committing I believe to have committed this heinous crime. And I have empathy for him and whatever, if something happened to him as a child, being bullied, feeling out of sorts, whatever you want to say. I think this part of the episode, it didn't really tell me a whole lot other than, of course, in hindsight, you got people saying all these things, but it's like you wonder, would they have even noticed any of those things and found them to be something memorable if it hadn't been for him committing those crimes. And it almost proved, sadly, like, I'm not saying it's ever okay to go, take someone's life, obviously, but it almost proved the point that someone like Bryan Kohberger might have of like, well, look at how everybody's treating me. I'm putting myself out there trying to make friends at a pool party, and, now we know he's on the spectrum, which, the defense might be playing up. I don't personally think it has much, if any, relevance to the crime itself. But when you're talking about his social awkwardness, and it's like, almost like people are making fun of him for like putting himself out there and trying to be social. And it sadly almost proved the point of like, well, look at how he's being treated by the public. And again, had he not done what he had done, I would have had compassion and empathy for how difficult that would be to everybody around you, thinking you're kind of a weirdo or whatever. Unfortunately, he chose to do something awful and ruin so many lives in the process. But in terms of, okay, these people that they interviewed talking about him being weird, and one guy said he saw him on this like remote hiking trail when he was by himself. The Brian Kohberger was by himself, and he was with a group, and he thought it was weird because he was just going up the hill, and it was like, 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and it was dark, whereas his group was finished because, it would be very unusual to go up there when it's that dark, and especially by yourself. So I don't really see how these interviews with these people has an effect on the case. I personally don't see that. The biggest thing that for me that I saw that was new, that I had never seen before, is evidently right before Kohberger was arrested, he was listening to a podcast about Ted Bundy, which, I mean, not weird in the sense of like people like true crime and he's a criminology student, but weird because, and this is something that Dateline showed, is so the thumbnail art on this podcast that he's listening to had Ted Bundy in like a black hoodie and kind of making a certain type of face, and Kohberger is also wearing a black hoodie, and he's taking pictures of himself that appear to be him mimicking and trying to recreate this cover art of Ted Bundy. And so in that sense, yes, it's very strange. I listen to true crime a lot because I'm in my car a lot, and never once in my car or at my own home have I decided like I'm gonna dress up like the cover art of this podcast or try to make myself look like a serial killer. So that is bizarre, and that, I guess, that might be the one thing that came out in this episode where I could see it might create kind of an unfair bias, right? Like the fact that he's doing that, because the trial, they might try to, who knows if that would even be led into trial. So that's maybe the one thing that I can think of. They do talk about, the fact that it's, Maddie was killed first. Now, interestingly enough, that is not new information. And it's not even not new information because people speculated that to be the case. There is actually an episode of 48 Hours that prior to the gag order, the medical examiner that did the autopsies in this case came out on 48 Hours. She spoke about the case a little bit, and she said that Maddie was killed first. So it might be new information to some people who didn't catch that episode, but that's certainly not new information, and that's information that's out there and available to the public. Also, anybody who follows this case closely that's read the probable cause document, I came out with a theory about how everything went down within the house on that night, and I used mostly the probable cause document and some other court filings to draw these conclusions. And I'm not saying this because I'm saying like, oh, I predicted that, or I came out with this theory of the case and look at me, but my point is that it's something that if you follow this case closely enough, you can kind of glean information. And yes, it is somewhat speculation, but there's a difference between outright making up a story and basing your conclusions on factual information that's been provided by law enforcement. And basically what I always have said, and I have, a screenshot of me putting this theory out there, I don't know, 9 months ago, at least a year ago. And basically, Brian Kohberger comes in through the sliding glass door. He's got some familiarity with that house already. He knows the person that he wants to target is on the 3rd floor, and that is Madison Mogen. He gets up to the 3rd floor. I don't know if sexual assault was part of his motive. part of me thinks it wasn't, only because it would be hard to do certain acts and not leave evidence behind. However, maybe he had plans on like doing something to himself after she died. Maybe he was going to, Ted Bundy was kind of into some of the with the, I don't want to say the wrong thing on YouTube, but doing certain things with deceased people, we'll say. But he did not know Kaylee was going to be over, because remember, Kaylee had just bought her Range Rover, and she was just in town to kind of show off her vehicle and to spend the weekend with Maddie. So he's not expecting Kaylee to be there. He also wouldn't recognize her vehicle because it's a new vehicle. So he's angry because she's ruining his plan and his fantasy that he's had in his head. So he kills Maddie first because Maddie's sleeping, and we now know she was highly intoxicated, and I hope for her sake it was quick and she didn't even know what happened. But in the whole, him attacking Maddie, it wakes up Kaylee, as you can imagine. Kaylee is a little less intoxicated, and she has an opportunity to get up and try to fight, and it's horrible because we know that Steve Gonsalves was on a podcast recently, and he said that Kohberger had punched Kaylee and had broken her jaw, and he was very violent with Kaylee and almost was more violent with her than some of the other victims, which kind of points to him being angry with her. And also, she was more of a physical obstacle because she was awake. And I'm not to say it wasn't still a total ambush, but he had to, contend with her fighting back. So that happens, and I think that there was some noise that was involved, and there was noises coming from upstairs, and the dog maybe started to bark. So Xana's downstairs. We know she got a DoorDash order at 4 o'clock in the morning. We know Kohberger enters the house at roughly, I want to say it's like 4:08 or something around there. 4:08, 4:09. He enters the home. So she's just probably eating. Maybe she's going back and forth from the kitchen to her room. Maybe she needed to get silverware. Who knows? But she starts hearing noises coming from upstairs. And I believe one of two things. Either Xana went upstairs to inquire about what the noises were that she was hearing, and then Kohberger chased her down the stairs, which is what they said in Dateline. My theory has always been more that he had somehow directly crossed paths with Xana after he's committed the 2 homicides upstairs. He is going to leave and crosses paths with Xana, like there's no avoiding it, right? Like, they outright cross paths to the point where Kohberger knows he's been seen by her. Then he tells her, like, it's okay, I'm just here to help you. He's trying to bide his time, trying to make a decision, and so that's why he's saying that kind of strange statement to her, trying to keep her calm, doesn't want her to scream, and then, of course, decides, okay, she's going to call the police right away, and I'm going to have police on my tail, so I'm going to have to take her life. So he, attacks her. Xana's trying to move towards her bedroom to get Ethan's attention, who's in the bed sleeping, and unfortunately, she succumbs to her stabbing injuries in her bedroom and collapses and falls on the floor. I believe that one of two things: either Ethan started to wake up from some of the commotion and the noise, or Ethan was sound asleep in the bed and he sorry, someone just texted me something, it distracted me. Ethan was in the bed and he had anger towards Ethan for being in a relationship with one of these beautiful young ladies. And so he attacks Ethan in his sleep, who doesn't have... Another thing, this was new on Dateline. Apparently he only, he hit a major artery and only stabbed or slashed Ethan once, and I believe it was in the throat area. And then he also carved his legs, which it was a new tidbit of information, which they talked about how that would show that he had, more anger towards the male, and which would make sense. And then after that, he's tired. He actually sits in a chair, which that came from Dateline. Obviously, that was not part of my theory. He sits in the chair and left a blood, like he was exhausted, and actually left like a imprint of blood on this chair in Xana's room. And then he proceeds to exit the house, and at that point Dylan opens her door. We don't know if he saw Dylan or not, if he was just too tired and was hoping maybe she wouldn't realize what he had done. And for whatever reason, he leaves the scene. Now, so there were some new things in there, I guess, from the Dateline perspective. There was the carving of the legs, which was not anything known to the public. And then there was the imprint of blood in the chair. So, he's basically doing all of these, sorry guys, I gotta move my car. You guys are probably like, what the heck? There's somebody with a U-Haul who needs to park here. Sorry guys, you're probably like, what the heck? Okay. So, after, by the way, the reason I record in my car is because I have 4 kids and I don't have a lot of time to do this, to do content, and I just get it in when I can. So, right now I'm just on a break in between doing deliveries and whatnot. So, when it comes to the Dateline episode, again, there were some nuggets that were new in the episode. Don't get me wrong. But when you step back from the episode and you start to look at, okay, first of all, Judge Hippler has allowed a lot of things to be released through court filings that are very much new information that we did not know about the case. Couple examples of that. There was the 911 phone call, the audio that was released. I think that was strategic on his part because it shows that the roommates, the surviving roommates, who I have so much empathy and compassion for, it shows that they really didn't know what was going on, and it shows the confusion and the realization of what actually had occurred. And I find it to be very, exonerating for anybody who, and I think it's so disgusting and sick that there are people who point the finger at them, but I do find it, I think that was part of Judge Hippler's motivation for allowing that to come out prior to trial. But there was a selfie of Kohberger taken the morning of the homicides where he's freshly showered and giving a thumbs up. And the reason that the prosecution wanted that picture allowed was because Dylan described the intruder as having bushy eyebrows, and that picture was taken the same day of the homicides, and it would give the jury a pretty good idea of what his eyebrows looked like at the time. Because you'll notice he's coming into court and someone's given him, maybe himself, a little trim job. So I don't know if he's doing the old plucking of the eyebrows or, a little bit of a mild shave to the eyebrows. But I actually joked when this first, not that, I can find humor in anything, and I think it's important to to try to find humor in anything, so I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I made a joke when this first happened, like he's gonna go to his court appearance with like completely shave his eyebrows off, as if he has like no eyebrows at all once that bushy eyebrow description came out. But anyway, so Judge Hippler has allowed things to come out, and I get it, like he wants to be able to pick and choose what comes out and what doesn't. But at the end of the day, this is my main point, and I feel like this is what's being missed by a lot of like the mainstream media that's having these extreme reactions and saying like the case is ruined and all the evidence is going to be thrown out and the jury pool's tainted and everything is just, you know, terrible. Let's talk about who's watching Dateline, okay? I personally, as you all know, I'm very into true crime, okay? I read court documents, I watch trials, the whole 9 yards. And so I watch every episode of Dateline. So yes, I wouldn't be a good juror. I mean, I think I could consider only what I saw in court, but I don't think I would be picked for a juror based on, especially for this particular case, based on the fact that I've seen so much of the pretrial publicity and the documentaries and all of that. But that did not change because of this one Dateline episode. Because I don't know one single person who doesn't follow this case or doesn't even really, like, maybe even loosely follows true crime, who's like, oh my gosh, I have to watch this Dateline episode because there's new stuff coming out about Brian Kohberger. Like, that's just not happening. So I look at someone like my husband. My husband has no interest in true crime. He finds it very depressing. He doesn't, you know, I like it for the forensics and figuring out, you know, why people do things like they do and how they solve cases. And he just finds it more like, I don't want to hear about kids being hurt or assaulted or terrible things happening to people, and that's the part he focuses on, so he just doesn't like it. And my husband, you know, he'll be in the background while I'm watching these shows. If I went up to him today and I said, hey, who's Brian Kohberger? He would look at me and he would be like, I don't know, some dude, because he just doesn't follow it. And so someone like my husband, who doesn't watch Dateline, who is not into true crime, he would have been a suitable juror prior to the Dateline episode, and he's still a suitable juror post the Dateline episode. And obviously, we're not in the Idaho jury pool, I'm just talking hypothetically. So when Judge Hippler goes on this rant about, and I like Judge Hippler, this is not me criticizing him. Typically, I agree with most of his decisions, but for him to say, like, oh, this one episode just totally taints the jury pool, there are not, I just don't see the people watching Dateline are these casual Dateline watchers who just only will watch an episode here and there when they're really interested in it. That isn't the way true crime works. When you look at the community, it's like, it's almost like you're really into it or you're not. Most people are not just like watching it here and there. And if there are people like that, it's few and far between. So, you know, it just seems to me like nobody's really looking at, well, what is the effect, what actually came out of this episode that would be so detrimental for a juror to know. And I can understand if there's certain things that maybe Judge Hippler wasn't going to allow in trial, and now it's out in the public. But again, if I'm one of these people like my husband who doesn't care about true crime, who's not watching these documentaries, I'm not going to know about any of these things that he's not allowing to come into court. And I just don't see it having the effect, you know, that he's saying that it's going to. I just think people are losing their minds, and if in fact, I feel like it's an excuse for the defense to now say, oh, we need more time, we need a continuance, and now they're going to ask for evidence to be thrown out, which I don't see that happening, because it just, to me, is weird. I've never heard of, like, evidence being thrown out of a case because of pretrial publicity. Please correct me if I'm wrong, if somebody knows of a good example of that, or I'm not saying it's never happened. It just doesn't seem like a reason that evidence gets thrown out, right? Like, I feel like we go into trials a lot knowing exactly what happened or exactly what the state has alleged happened. So I'm not quite understanding the outrage here. I almost find it to be like faux outrage on the part of the defense, because it gives them an excuse to want a continuance. And so, or, maybe they're hoping to find some way to use it to take the death penalty off the table. But it's one of the pitfalls of true crime, like people just not really using their common sense and just having a reaction to something and not really thinking it through. Because I just don't see that this episode has ruined the jury pool, as Hitler has said. And I honestly, again, given all of the information that he's let come through court filings, I do find it a little odd that he is making it seem like it is going to have this big effect on the case. I don't know. I know the defense has asked for a continuance. I don't believe the judge has made a decision on their request at this point in time. I will say that if you look at a death penalty case from the time, I don't know if you want to go by the time a crime occurred or the time a suspect is arrested, but for a case to get to trial, just under 3 years is actually very quick. And so I want people, and this is just my personal opinion, I don't think it's going to go to trial in August. I hope I'm wrong. Hitler's made it very clear he doesn't want more delays, but I also think he obviously has a reaction to the Dateline episode that more favors the defense in terms of the what the effect it's going to have on the case. So anyway, those are my thoughts. I'm sorry if I'm kind of all over the place. I encourage people, watch the Dateline episode if you haven't already. Tell me your thoughts. But I think at the end of the day, people need to just step back and say, who's watching Dateline? It's not just, someone that's not into that type of thing is not going to just seek out this one episode. Okay? So they're going to be able to find a jury. I would say, 80% of the people in my life are not into true crime and probably could not tell you who Brian Kohberger is. So, and as a matter of fact, the next time I'm at like a family gathering, I am going to ask people, just random like family members, like cousins, I'm going to say, hey, do you know who Brian Kohberger is? And I will come give you some, maybe I'm going to try to survey like 100 random people, and I will give you guys my results. So that's it for today. I'm going to cover the Nicole Rice trial for the homicide. It was a cold case of Anita Knutson. And so that's going to be my next episode. Hopefully I'll get that out later this week. Talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.